The Imperium was built not upon stone or steel, but upon belief. For 10,000 years, humanity has survived because it chose to worship instead of understand. The Emperor became more than ruler. He became silence turned into law, pain turned into hope. In the endless dark of the 41st millennium, faith became both weapon and anesthesia. The people no longer ask if he listens. They ask only how loudly they must pray. Every world of the Imperium is an altar. Hive cities rise like monuments to devotion, their streets echoing with endless hymns that drown the sound of machinery. From the frozen cathedrals of Valhalla to the firelit slums of Necromunda, the same words resound: the Emperor protects. No one knows when the phrase stopped being truth and became habit. It has been repeated for so long that even the walls of the underhives hum it in their cracks. Faith in the Imperium is not a virtue. It is infrastructure. Entire economies run on devotion. Entire armies fight on prayer alone. To stop believing is to stop existing. Confessors march through manufactoria, shouting sermons through vox horns to workers who cannot look up from their tasks. Pilgrims starve in transit to Terra, dying on ships that will never reach his light. They die smiling, because dying in faith is the only way to live without meaning. The Emperor's body still sits upon the golden throne, a god machine of rust and immortality that devours 1,000 psychers each day. His gaze, once bright enough to blind, is now unseen, unfelt, unproven. Yet his priests insist he listens still. They point to every flicker of light, every coincidental survival as proof of divine will. The truth that the Emperor has not answered a prayer in millennia is never spoken, only felt in the quiet moments between hymns. Every creed within the ecclesiarchy begins with sound. Chanting, bells, engines, the roar of a crowd, noise has become proof of life. Silence, on the other hand, is feared more than death. A chapel without song is a corpse. A priest who stops preaching is a traitor. The faithful fill the void with endless repetition, terrified that the stillness might reveal the truth, that no one listens anymore. On Terra itself, the heart of the Imperium, the faith industry never stops. The ecclesiarch's towers shimmer in the eternal smog, and millions of voices rise in unison, not from joy but obligation. Each prayer is a transaction, each confession a currency. And somewhere beneath that ocean of sound, beneath layers of stone, circuitry, and dust, the Emperor sits upon his throne, a god imprisoned by his own divinity. His silence has lasted 10,000 years. It has become the only constant truth. The priests call his silence divine patience. The soldiers call it unshakable strength. But the common man, the miner, the scribe, the starving pilgrim, they know what silence feels like. It feels like being forgotten. Still, they keep praying, because prayer is the last connection they have to meaning. The Imperium does not need answers. It only needs echoes. Every faith eventually consumes itself, and the Imperium's appetite is infinite. Confessors burn heretics for questioning the Emperor's voice, even as they themselves strain to hear it. Whole planets are purged to silence doubts, yet the silence always returns, heavier, more honest, more human. The galaxy remains obedient but not devout. Fear now holds the place where faith once lived. The ecclesiarchy knows this truth but cannot admit it. Their sermons have grown longer, louder, more theatrical. Massive cathedral ships roam the void, spreading doctrine like a plague. They beam hymns across star systems, their signal flickering through void storms and warp interference. It does not matter if the message is heard. What matters is that it never stops. For in the Imperium, silence is heresy, and faith must be deafening to survive. The Golden Throne still burns, fed by human souls. The Astronomicon still shines, guiding ships through the warp. These are considered miracles, proof that the Emperor listens still. Yet every psyker who feeds that flame screams the same words before death. He does not answer. The priests dismiss it as madness, but their voices tremble. For all their power, all their relics, and all their rituals, even they cannot remember what it was like to be heard. Silence spreads differently in the Imperium. It is not sudden like fire, nor loud like rebellion. It seeps. It begins in the smallest moments, a candle failing to relight after prayer, a saint's relic turning cold, a dying man whispering the emperor's name and finding no comfort in the darkness. The ecclesiarchy calls such things anomalies. The people call them omens. Within months, entire hives begin to notice that their prayers do not work like they once did. In the manufactoria of Varan's Reach, the workers once believed that the emperor's light prevented reactor meltdowns. Every day they prayed before starting the plasma engines, whispering litanies through soot-covered lips. One morning the engine exploded mid-chant. Thousands died. The priests arrived days later, blaming insufficient devotion. They held sermons among the ashes, shouting louder than the screams that still echoed from beneath the rubble. Faith became punishment. Across the Imperium, shrines grow quieter. Pilgrims still come, but they do not leave smiling. The miracles that once defined their lives, the sudden survival of ships through warp storms, the healing of wounds through relics, begin to vanish. The ecclesiarchy responds not with answers, but with noise. Vox networks broadcast sermons 24 hours a day, drowning the galaxy in prayer. Silence is outlawed. Even sleep is interrupted by recorded hymns played through public speakers. The priests do not admit the truth aloud, but they feel it. They kneel before their altars and sense only emptiness. The light that once flared in the presence of prayer has dimmed. Some weep in secret, others lash out in fanatic rage, burning entire congregations to purify disbelief. Faith becomes louder, harsher, crueler. The more silent the emperor grows, the more violently his servants insist that he listens. In the cold void of the Segmentum Pacificus, a cardinal world named Sanctus Oleon once boasted of its living miracles. Statues that wept blood, relics that glowed with holy fire, and saints whose bodies never decayed. Now the statues are dry. The relics grow cold. The saints' flesh rots. The pilgrims still arrive, though fewer each day. The priests tell them the silence is a test, that faith must burn brighter in the dark. Yet every sermon feels hollower, every chant more desperate. When the crowds leave, the priests look at one another and see the same fear reflected in iron candlelight. The imperial creed is written to withstand doubt, but not emptiness. For centuries, the ecclesiarchy relied on symbols, relics, and the authority of miracles. Without them, faith becomes thin, a ritual with no pulse. In the cathedrals of Ophelia VII, sermons now end not with shouts of triumph, but with whispers. Priests begin to question in secret whether their God, mummified on his throne, can even hear through the machinery that sustains him. They erase such thoughts from record immediately, calling them data corruption of the soul. On worlds at the fringe, where the Astronomican's light flickers faintly through the warp, the silence becomes unbearable. Entire planets go months without contact, their priests unable to feel divine presence. Some lose their minds. Others invent new sects, claiming to interpret the emperor's hidden voice through dreams, through static, through pain. These cults spread like infection, not because people believe them, but because belief itself has become unbearable. It is easier to worship madness than nothing. Psychers, the living conduits to the emperor's will, begin to feel the change first. Where once his voice thundered in their minds like sunlight through storm clouds, now there is only emptiness, or worse, whispering. Some collapse mid-ritual, screaming that they hear something else in the void, something wearing the shape of divinity. Their words are silenced before they can spread. The black ships collect them swiftly. The ecclesiarchy insists it is corruption. The priests do not dare consider another explanation. In the hive world of Heliosa, a confessor named Marek records his final sermon. He stands before a congregation of 10,000, his voice echoing through catacomb streets lined with candles. The emperor, he says, tests our faith not through words but through silence. He withholds himself that we may earn his voice anew. The crowd weeps, but their tears are not joy. When the sermon ends, no one leaves. They remain kneeling, waiting for something. A light, a warmth, a sound. Nothing comes. By dawn, half of them are dead, still kneeling in the same position. The ecclesiarchy's response to growing despair is control. They outlaw doubt. Questioning the emperor's silence becomes a punishable offense. Priests who confess uncertainty are disappeared. Cathedrals begin holding mandatory attendance, forcing entire populations into nightly prayer rituals broadcast by servo drones. The hum of machines replaces human voices. The prayers become mechanical, repeated, empty, endless. It is worship by automation. The administratum grows uneasy. Reports of religious collapse reach Terra, but none dare present them formally. The High Lords demand statistics proving faith stability, and so the numbers are forged. Charts show growth in devotion, increased tithes, stronger loyalty. The lie is mutual. Everyone knows the Emperor no longer speaks, but everyone also knows the Imperium cannot survive the truth. Lies are the new form of prayer. Deep in the catacombs beneath Terra, near the glow of the Golden Throne, a silent order of priests gathers in secret. They are called the Listeners. Their task, to sit in the Emperor's shadow and listen for his breath. For centuries they recorded whispers, faint, distorted echoes mistaken for miracles. Now there is nothing. No sound, no energy, not even static. The oldest listener weeps, his tears carving clean lines through dust on his face. He has gone beyond sound, he says. He is everywhere but nowhere, yet the galaxy does not stop turning. Fleets still sail, wars still rage, the Astronomicon still shines, though fainter. The Imperium still functions. Proof, perhaps, that faith has momentum even without its source. Humanity is too vast, too desperate to stop believing. To abandon faith is to abandon meaning itself. And so the silence spreads, not as death but as inheritance. Every prayer becomes an echo. Every echo becomes a habit, and habit becomes history. In the far reaches of Ultima Segmentum, where faith has decayed entirely, a strange thing happens. Farmer, long forgotten by the ecclesiarchy, kneels in the dirt before the ruins of a shrine. He does not pray for salvation. He prays for memory, that somewhere someone still listens. He waits all night, and in the final moments before dawn he hears something faint, the hum of a power line vibrating through the earth like a heartbeat. He smiles, believing it divine. Perhaps it is. Perhaps the universe too has learned to imitate faith. And so the silence continues, heavy, sacred, unstoppable. It does not crush the Imperium. It becomes it. The people forget the sound of answers, but they remember how to kneel. That is enough. In the grim darkness of the far future, there are no replies, only the persistence of prayer. In the high cathedrals of Terra, the Emperor's priests no longer sleep. Their nights are spent drafting new sermons, rewriting old ones, and inventing new hymns to fill the silence that grows heavier with every passing century. The ecclesiarchy is no longer a church. It is a sound machine, an engine designed to keep humanity chanting loud enough to drown out its doubt. The priests speak not because they believe, but because silence has become unbearable. The ecclesiarch himself, supreme shepherd of billions, sits upon a throne of gold and gilt. His robes shimmer with the dust of sanctified stars, his voice carried across entire systems through psychic amplification. His every word is scripted, his every sermon a performance. He no longer prays, he recites. Beneath his crown of circuitry, he wonders if the Emperor still exists, but he buries the thought under layers of scripture. To doubt is to cease existing as a priest. To cease existing as a priest is to fall into the void. Within the lower sanctums of the Ministorum, thousands of confessors and cardinals debate endlessly about the silence. Some insist that the Emperor speaks only through tragedy, that every death, every famine, every lost world is a syllable of divine language too vast for mortals to understand. Others whisper heresy, that the Emperor has become as hollow as his worshippers, his divinity devoured by the very faith that sustains him. Each sect calls the other blasphemous. Their arguments are drowned by endless hymnals played on loop through vox towers. The priests of Ophelia VII are the first to fracture. Their world, once the ecclesiarchy's beating heart, becomes the stage for doctrinal war. The high cardinals command their followers to proclaim the doctrine of constant communion, a belief that silence is not absence, but divine withdrawal, a sacred pause between breaths. Their rivals declare that the Emperor's silence is punishment for unworthiness. Both sides claim righteousness. Both sides burn the other's churches. The flames rise so high that they light the void itself, and the ecclesiarchy calls it renewal. In the archives of terror, ancient texts sealed since the Great Crusade are unearthed by desperate scholars. Among them lies a forbidden manuscript, the Canticles of Cessation. It speaks of an age when the emperor's voice was once human, filled with warmth and reason. It warns of a day when his power would outlast his consciousness, leaving behind only a mechanism that feeds but does not speak. The priests who read it are executed. The text is burned, but the idea remains, whispering like smoke in the corridors of faith. The fabrication of miracles becomes a sacred duty. Across countless worlds, the ecclesiarchy commissions entire manufactoria to produce artificial relics. Servo skulls pump vials of red-dyed water into saintly statues to simulate weeping blood. Hidden generators make sacred candles burn eternally. Servo priests are programmed to fall into divine trances at prearranged times. The faithful gather and cry, believing they have seen the emperor's hand. The priests call it mercy. The administratum calls it stability. The truth is that the Imperium can no longer distinguish between miracle and maintenance, but even among the liars, there are believers. Some priests cling to faith with a desperation so pure it borders on madness. They mutilate themselves in hopes that pain will bridge the distance between man and God. Others retreat into isolation, building secret shrines within the hives, lit only by dying candles. They whisper prayers not to be heard, but to remember how to speak. Faith becomes an act of survival, a ritual against the collapse of meaning. In the Basilica of St. Lucidia, where 1,000 voices once sang in unison, the choirs have fallen silent. The great organ, once powered by the souls of martyrs, now wheezes with the sound of exhaustion. The high priest of the basilica kneels before the altar, surrounded by the rusted remains of holy machinery. If he does not hear, he murmurs, then we must learn to listen for ourselves. He dies that night, found smiling beneath the cracked, stained glass. His death is declared heresy. His body is fed to the pyres. The ecclesiarchy begins purging its own. Confessors accuse fellow priests of faithlessness. Trials are held where evidence is irrelevant. The only defense is louder worship. The guilty are burned, their ashes used to paint new scripture on cathedral walls. Entire sectors become theaters of devotion, where public displays of worship are mandatory and spontaneous ecstasy is enforced. The louder the prayers, the hollower they sound. Psychers are exploited as proof of divine activity. The ministorum chains them in sacred chambers, forcing them to channel warp light as miracles for the masses. Many die screaming, consumed by powers they cannot control. The ecclesiarchy calls their deaths divine contact. The crowd believes, because belief is safer than truth. On some worlds, priests begin using captured demons to mimic holy phenomena. These false lights burn entire cities, and yet the survivors worship their ashes. In the lower levels of terror, among the forgotten maintenance tunnels beneath the cathedrals, heretics gather in secret, priests who have abandoned the pretense of hearing the emperor's voice. They do not seek to restore faith, they seek to understand silence. They sit in darkness, recording the sound of nothing, believing that somewhere within the void lies a new kind of truth. They call themselves the Order of Still Communion. The ecclesiarchy hunts them ruthlessly. Each captured heretic is tortured until they scream praise again. Their screams are recorded and played during Mass as proof of faith's endurance. The silence does not weaken the Imperium. It reshapes it. The priests realize this too late. The Emperor no longer needs to speak. His silence has become doctrine. His absence a form of control more powerful than any voice. The faithful no longer worship to be heard. They worship to belong. The galaxy's greatest religion no longer requires belief, only participation. Still, there are rumors of anomalies. On a dying agri-world, a chapel buried beneath centuries of dust begins to emit faint sound, a rhythmic hum, soft and steady. The priests arrive in awe, declaring it the Emperor's return. But when they translate the sound, they find no words, only the pattern of human breath. It could be a glitch. It could be a memory. It could be the echo of humanity praying to itself. Whatever it is, they seal the chapel and name it a miracle. By now, the Emperor's silence is complete. But his voice is everywhere, in speakers, in engines, in hymns replayed by machines that have long outlived their creators. The priests stand before their congregations and shout the same words day after day, not to inspire, but to preserve rhythm. Faith has become like breathing, unconscious, necessary, empty. The silence that began as a wound has become the Imperium's pulse, and in the deepest chambers of the ecclesiarchy, where light cannot reach and even sound seems to die, a lone confessor kneels before a forgotten terminal. He speaks softly, not a prayer but a confession. We have mistaken his silence for love. The machine hums once faintly, as if in agreement. Then, as always, it falls quiet again. The Imperium has forgotten why it began to pray. Faith has become its engine, its architecture, its heartbeat. Even without miracles, without replies, the galaxy keeps kneeling. The priests chant not to be heard, but because they have forgotten how to stop. The churches do not preach belief. They preach repetition. Worship has become a reflex, an instinct embedded deeper than fear. The Emperor's silence is no longer a mystery. It is a structure. On the shrine world of Halith Prime, billions rise each morning at the toll of mechanical bells that have not been touched by human hands in centuries. The bells ring automatically, their servitor systems long since self-repairing. People wake, kneel, and whisper prayers before screens that broadcast the same sermon recorded 10,000 years ago. The original priest is dust, but his voice still echoes, his face flickering in endless repetition. To the people, this is comfort. To the few who think it is haunting, every aspect of imperial life has become ritualized. Farmers bless their crops with irradiated holy water, knowing it will poison the soil, but believing faith purifies all. Administratum scribes begin each document with the same line, "By his will we write," though none remember what his will was. Soldiers carve the aquila onto their armor before battle, not to protect themselves, but because dying without it feels wrong. The Imperium no longer worships the Emperor. It worships the shape of belief itself. In the data shrines of the Adeptus Ministorum, hymnals are now generated by algorithms. Artificial choirs composed of machine voices recite binary litanies in perfect synchronization. The priests call this divine harmony. In truth, it is automation. The machines pray because they have been commanded to, and no one remembers how to switch them off. The last human choirs were dissolved generations ago, their songs replaced by cleaner, more efficient rhythms. Faith, like production, has been mechanized. The ecclesiarchy's bureaucracy mirrors its theology. Entire planets are governed by clerical logic. Worship is calculated, measured, and reported as output. Faith quotas are issued to every province. Populations are graded by their piety metrics. The holiest worlds are those that pray the longest and complain the least. On the fringes of the Imperium, where hunger and plague fester, people die clutching prayer tokens, their final breath reciting empty words. The ecclesiarchy records such deaths as proof of devotion. Unaware that devotion is the only thing left to die for, a new generation of priests emerges, born into a galaxy where the Emperor's silence is a fact, not a question. They do not preach about his love or his judgment. They preach about the rhythm of his absence. They teach that silence itself is sacred, that the lack of miracles is the greatest miracle of all. These are the preachers of stillness, and they spread across the stars like a contagion. The ecclesiarchy fears them but cannot stop them. Their faith is unbreakable because it requires nothing. In hive cities, massive vox towers beam prayer signals across the void, repeating the same phrase endlessly. The Emperor protects. Over time, the transmission distorts, fragments, and loops into something new. The Empire protects. The message changes, but no one notices. It plays across sectors, embedded into communication networks, repeating through every machine that carries Imperial code. The Imperium has begun to pray to its own name. The administratum grows bloated with spiritual bureaucracy. Entire departments exist solely to catalog the number of prayers spoken daily across the galaxy. Their data is meaningless, But the illusion of devotion must be maintained. One scribe, whose task is to count the repetitions of a single hymn broadcast through the segmentum obscurus, dies at his desk. His replacement continues without pause. His death is recorded as a smooth transition of faith duties. On the agri-world of Lornis Theta, the people no longer know what the Emperor looks like. The icons of his image have degraded through centuries of reproduction. Each new statue is sculpted from the last, the details softened until his face is an abstract of gold and shadow. Yet the people kneel before it, moved to tears. The priests declare it a revelation. The Emperor's visage is beyond mortal comprehension. The truth is simpler. No one remembers the original. The silence has changed the nature of miracles. Where once they were proof of divine will, now they are interpreted as echoes of devotion itself. When a reactor fails and 1,000 workers survive, it is not seen as the Emperor's mercy, but as evidence that faith sustains physics. Belief maintains reality, one priest declares. To doubt is to decay. The phrase becomes law. Whole worlds are purged for disbelief, not because it offends the Emperor, but because it threatens the cohesion of the Imperium's rhythm. Among the Adeptus Mechanicus, a parallel faith blooms. Having long accepted the silence of the Omnissiah, they begin to merge their theology with the ecclesiarchies. Tech priests chant in unison with clerics, their binary prayers intertwining with Gregorian hymns. For the first time, the two faiths agree on doctrine, not because they share truth, but because they share silence. Machine and man now worship together, each mistaking the other's voice for the Emperor's. Across the galaxy, servitors continue to perform their tasks. Some, long abandoned by their masters, remain in empty cathedrals, polishing relics and lighting candles for congregations that no longer exist. Their circuits replay the same litanies, their synthetic voices echoing through dust and ruin. To any observer, these are ghosts, machines haunting the empire of faith, praying out of habit rather than purpose. In their endless repetition, they become the truest believers. On Terra, deep beneath the surface, a new sect arises among the administrative clergy. They call themselves the Curators of Echo. Their duty is to preserve the recordings of prayers from every era, billions of voices layered into archives that stretch for miles. They claim the Emperor can still hear through memory. When asked how they know, they answer, because the sound continues. No one can argue. The sound never stops. Somewhere beyond the eastern fringe, a missionary fleet transmits sermons into the void. They know no one hears them. The vox returns nothing but static, yet they persist, their voices cracking, their oxygen failing. When the last priest dies, his vox continues broadcasting, powered by the ship's reactor. For centuries afterward, his words drift through space, endlessly repeating, "He protects even if he does not speak." In the warp, the message echoes like a prayer that has forgotten who it was meant for. The Emperor's silence has become the Imperium's language. Every ritual, every commandment, every word of doctrine flows from the assumption that no answer will ever come. And in that endless void of divine absence, something new begins to grow. Not hope, but self-sustaining obedience. Humanity has learned to worship the act of worship. The Empire no longer kneels before its God. It kneels before its own persistence. The priests of the modern age speak proudly of the Imperium's eternal faith. They call it proof of divine endurance. But in the quiet chambers of the Ecclesiarchy's archives, a scholar writes a forbidden note in his journal. The Emperor no longer needs to speak. His silence has become our God. The ink dries. He tears the page out and burns it. Yet the words remain etched in his mind, as eternal as the prayers that surround him. And still the bells ring. They ring through vacuum, through ash, through time itself. Automatic, precise, unfeeling. Somewhere, someone still kneels, not knowing why, not remembering who they kneel for. The sound of devotion fills the galaxy, a song with no listener, a hymn without a god. The Empire prays to itself, and in doing so it never dies. In the 41st millennium, there are no atheists left, only those who pray without hope. Faith has become the Imperium's final inheritance, passed from generation to generation, like a relic whose meaning was lost long ago. No one remembers when the Emperor's voice last touched a human soul. They remember only the echo, and the echo is all they have. The Astronomicon still burns across the void, its light steady but weaker, fed by the souls of psychers who die by the thousands every day. It is the Imperium's only proof that the Emperor still lives. But even that light feels colder now, mechanical, detached like a dying star burning out of habit. Ships still follow it through the warp, but their navigators whisper in fear that the light no longer guides, only blinds. On Terra, the priests continue their work. Every day, thousands kneel before the Golden Throne, chanting litanies older than memory. They cannot see him. The blinding radiance and psychic storms around his form make that impossible. But they believe he is there, they must. For if he is not, then every prayer, every sacrifice, every death since the dawn of the Imperium has been meaningless. And the galaxy cannot survive meaninglessness. The throne itself has become more machine than divine. Tubes, cables, and life support conduits feed into the corpse of the Emperor, keeping the illusion of life intact. Engineers and priests no longer know which systems sustain him and which sustain the device. They are terrified to touch any part of it for fear of ending both. Some whisper that the Emperor died long ago, that what remains is a circuit of worship, an ancient mechanism that converts belief into light. None dare test the theory. Faith is safer than truth. In the underhives of Necromunda, a child named Nera whispers the same prayer every night. Her parents died in the Manufactoria fires, her city black with ash. She prays not for salvation, but for a sound, a single whisper in the void to tell her she is not alone. She hears nothing, as always. Still, she keeps praying. Her voice joins billions across the galaxy, a small note in the endless hymn of survival. The Emperor does not answer, but perhaps the stars do. Across 1,000 worlds, faith has evolved into ritual theater. Cathedrals now operate like factories, processing worship as output. Each day they produce billions of recorded prayers, stored in data vaults and transmitted into the void. The ecclesiarchy calls it the Great Archive of Devotion, a monument of sound to bridge eternity. Every citizen of the Imperium is born into it, baptized not with water but with noise. Silence is death. Repetition is immortality. But amid that endless chorus there are still moments of stillness, brief, fragile spaces where someone dares to stop. A soldier dying on a forgotten moon, a priest who closes his mouth mid-hymn, a mother who forgets the words. In those rare seconds, the silence feels almost holy, as if the galaxy itself exhales. The Emperor may not speak, but the quiet becomes something else, not absence but understanding. On one forgotten world near the halo stars, an old monastery still stands. It has no priests left, no congregation. The machines that once rang its bells have long since rusted into stillness. Inside, a single man remains, an aged confessor named Halden, blind and half mad. Each dawn he recites the same prayer he has spoken for 80 years. He no longer expects an answer. His voice shakes with age, but the rhythm remains steady, like a heartbeat against the void. One morning his voice falters. He kneels before the empty altar, hands trembling. "My lord," he whispers, "I do not ask for miracles. I do not ask for mercy. I only ask that my words reach somewhere." He waits. Only wind moves through the ruined chapel. He smiles faintly. Then that too will be enough. He dies quietly, his final breath merging with the dust of his chapel. No one witnesses it, but the monastery's dormant Vox transmitter, dead for centuries, flickers on for a single second, broadcasting his last words into the void. The signal travels across space, faint and broken. It passes through debris fields, across dying stars into the black where the Astronomicon's light no longer reaches. Somewhere in the depths of the warp something hears it. Not a god, not a demon, but the echo of humanity itself. The sound reverberates, fragments, multiplies. Soon countless faint transmissions across the galaxy begin repeating his words. "I only ask that my words reach somewhere." It spreads like a pulse through the void, not divine but undeniably alive. The priests of Terra detect the anomaly weeks later. A faint signal pattern, repeating from hundreds of worlds. They gather in awe, calling it the resonance of faith. They claim the Emperor has spoken through his people, returning their devotion as reflection. But the Magi of Mars analyze it differently. It is no voice, no psychic broadcast, only the synchronization of human transmissions across impossible distances. It is the Imperium's collective prayer echoing itself. The Emperor has not spoken, humanity has. The Ecclesiarchy declares a new holiday, the Day of Reflection. On that day, every voice in the Imperium falls silent. No sermons, no hymns, no recordings. For one single moment, the galaxy holds its breath. Across millions of worlds, billions kneel in absolute quiet. In the vacuum of that silence, ships drift through the void without guidance. Planets tremble in psychic stillness, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the Imperium listens. No one knows what they hear. Some claim faint whispers, not words but warmth. Others claim they hear nothing at all and yet feel peace. The Emperor remains silent, but the silence itself becomes sacred. For the first time, humanity learns that perhaps divinity was never in the voice but in the act of listening. After the Day of Reflection, the Imperium resumes its endless work. The ships sail again, the forges burn, and the prayers return to their rhythm. But they are softer now, less desperate, more deliberate. The galaxy remains brutal, unchanging, but something subtle lingers. The idea that even in silence there is connection. That in worship, humanity was never waiting for the Emperor. It was waiting for itself. On Terra, the golden throne hums as always. The Emperor's withered form remains still, his eyes forever closed. Yet somewhere deep within the machine, a single pulse flickers. It could be coincidence, it could be malfunction, or it could be acknowledgement, not of power but of memory. A gesture from the dying god to the faith that refused to die with him. And so the Imperium endures. The priests preach, the ships travel, the people kneel. The Emperor does not answer, and that is no longer tragedy, it is truth. Humanity has built eternity from silence, and silence has answered in kind. In the farthest corners of the galaxy, where the stars are dying and the void hums softly with the echoes of prayer, one truth remains. The Emperor may never speak again, but humanity will never stop listening.